Good morning. Sorry, that candle's not going to make it. Replace it. Precepts incense, samadhi incense, wisdom incense, liberation incense, cloud of lighted incense, pouring into the dharma realms, offering to the highest teachers of the 10 directions. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to the incense cloud bodhisattva. I respectfully bow to all directions of space, all realms, past, present, and future, all Buddhas, the honored Dharma, the enlightened Sangha, the permanent three treasures. I respectfully bow to our own teacher, Sakyamuni Buddha, the future-born Maitreya Buddha, great wisdom, Manjushri Bodhisattva, great practice, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, Dharma protector Bodhisattva, as Buddhas and Bodhisattvas assembled at the great holy mountain. I respectfully bow to the great love, great compassion, Amitabha Buddha of the Western Paradise, great compassion, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, great power, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, great power, Mahastamapada Bodhisattva, all the Bodhisattvas in the great pure ocean. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see so many of you here already. So, when I put out the schedule for this month, this is homecoming week at Stetson. And the plan was for me to be hosting or helping to officiate a chapel this morning in Lee Chapel at Stetson University, the homecoming chapel. And then things kind of got complicated because of some technical stuff and needing to put things in, available to people remotely and that sort of thing. So we ended up pre-recording our chapel service. So I could have gone to Wysense had I known that, but I didn't know that far enough in advance. So then I thought, well, I'll just pre-record this Dharma talk anyway, which is what I would have done had I been in chapel this morning. This would have been a pre-recorded talk. And that way I can stay in bed. Well, I never stay in bed that long, right? I have a wedding this afternoon down in Orlando. So I said, well, I'll just, I like talking. Even though I can't see you, I like knowing that there are people actually here. I don't know, it's just better somehow. So then the other thing is, I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, and I'm pretty happy this morning. And there's, I know, a number of people in our congregation who are probably happy this morning because of some political progress from last night, right? But it occurred to me that this, I'm talking to the internet here, right? And this is going to be around for a long time. You might be watching this 100 years after I gave this talk. And the political situation that a number of people in this country are very happy about right now, and a number of people, frankly, disappointed by, will be something you read about in history books and won't be particularly relevant to you. But you know what will still be relevant 100 years from now? Greed, hatred, and delusion, right? Those things are still going to be with us. And so people will still be looking for ways to transcend that and to get out of the cycle of suffering that those things keep us in. So I'm going to talk about karma, because another thing that will be around 100 years from now are the effects of the actions of today. So, that's never an irrelevant conversation. And it also happens that this topic has come up quite a bit lately, which is why I had selected it for this morning anyway. People ask me about karma a lot. There's a lot of misunderstanding and not even misunderstanding, but there's different views of karma in different traditions. And so I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about karma and kind of clear up some of those things, and then see how can we work with this concept ourselves, in our spiritual life and in our daily life. So one of the conversations that I had with someone about this, they said something about Buddhism and why they had started practicing Buddhism. This was an email kind of correspondence that I had with somebody, and they said something about a self-improvement program, like they were on trying to use this period of COVID time and all of that for self-improvement. And I thought, well, the Buddhist view, this thing we call a self is a very sort of nebulous and even non-existent quality. So what self are you going to improve, right? It's an interesting question. So it's kind of from a psychological standpoint and from a spiritual standpoint, the idea of improving yourself is kind of treacherous concept. It's sort of it's a sticky thing, right? Because this idea of what is the self and how am I going to improve it implies that you're going to rate yourself, and which means you're going to judge yourself. And people start talking about being judgmental or toward themselves and others and so on, and how that really leads in a direction that is unskillful and unhelpful. And so the idea of improving yourself, rating yourself, is it's not really worth pursuing. But you can improve your karma. You do own that. It's going to be with you. And it's going to have effects beyond this lifetime in the Buddhist view. So it's an important concept in Buddhism, and it's something that's definitely well worth looking at. So I mentioned the confusion about it. We don't just have the Buddhist view of what karma is in our society. We also hear about the Brahmanistic view of it, the Hindu view of it, for lack of a better term, which is a little different, similar, related, but different. And there's kind of a popular view of karma, kind of the way it appears in sort of common usage and in pop culture. Remember, there's a TV show several years ago, I think it was called My Name is Earl, right? That was about this guy trying to deal with some negative karma. And it was it was kind of funny, but it was, this is kind of, it demonstrates the way we get kind of confused about the idea. So hopefully I can explain the Buddhist point of view on it, why it's important, and some ideas about how you might apply it in your life. So the Sanskrit word karma, the Pali word is kama, K-A-M-M-A. That means action. And so specifically, we're concerned with willful actions, not just things we do, but things we willfully do, and not just actions of body, but also willful actions of speech and mind. So in our culture, a lot of the time we think, well, I just thought about this, I didn't do it, so therefore no harm, no foul, right? And to some extent, right, that's kind of true. But the reality is, if we spend a lot of time willfully engaging in negative actions of mind, we're going to experience some results of that. So, but it does mean intentional actions. So it's a relatively simple law of cause and effect. If I do good, I get a good result. If I do bad, I get a bad result. But it's if I do bad intentionally, if I do good intentionally. So, for example, when I drive to White Sands Buddhist Center on a Sunday morning, I might kill some bugs in the process. It's very difficult to drive in Florida without killing a bug. But I don't leave the house to get in the car to go kill bugs. I leave the house and go get in the car to talk about the Dharma. So any bug killing was unintentional. And so it has relatively little karmic effect, unless, I know that, hey, if I leave earlier in the morning, I'll kill more bugs, right? Then that would be an intentional thing. Or if I had a choice about when to leave, when to come home, things like that, and I knew that there were times of day that I was likely to kill more bugs, I should avoid those. It's good for my car's paint to avoid that, for one thing. But also, if that's an issue, and you have a choice, you could keep that in mind. But if you stub your toe and suddenly let out a string of curse words, that doesn't have the same negative karma as if you curse someone with the hope of making them feel bad, or if you lie to someone in order to cause them trouble. So that would be the case of a negative karma of speech, and how intention determines how bad the negative karma is. So the actions of mind, the thing that comes to mind immediately for me is that President Carter, which was he was the first president I voted for, and it was a long time ago. But he had talked at some point, I can't remember if it was before or after his election, about how he had lusted in his heart. Well, and he referred to that as a sin. Yes, he had sinned. He had lusted in his heart. Well, in Buddhism, it would kind of depend on the whole picture as to whether or not we consider that negative karma. We don't really use the term sin, although you'll hear it mentioned in some contexts. But I don't use it. It has a weird connotation for me. But negative karma, it might have been a negative karma, might not have been a negative karma. Kind of depends. So if a lustful thought arises, then that's unintentional. You can't prevent yourself from having thoughts. If you ever want to test that, then sit down for 5 minutes and say, I'm not going to think about flying purple elephants. And you will immediately think about a flying purple elephant. And then, or just say, I'm going to sit here for 5 minutes and not think. And you will definitely have thoughts arise. But once you're aware of the thought, then you can decide whether to nurture that thought or whether to let it pass. So if you nurture it, then that's willful, and that makes it a karma, right? So if a lustful thought arises, if lust towards someone arises, and you let that pass, then no harm, no foul. But if you decide you're going to sit and fantasize about that for a while, well, then you've made a willful decision to think actively about something. So look, I'm not condemning you for your sexual fantasies. Everybody has them, right? I won't condemn you for your angry, vengeful fantasies. Everybody has them. But realize that when you engage in those things, when you indulge in those things, it does have an effect on your mind. And so the thing to do when you notice that you've been doing that is to stop. And stopping is good karma, right? When you sever that link of causation at that point, then you've severed the connection between the negative patterns of mind that you're born with, or that you've developed over time as a result of karma, and the suffering that happens as a result of it. So when we talk about the law of karma, though, we're really talking about something like a physical law, like the law of inertia, or the law of gravity. We're not talking about some sort of divine rule. We're not punished by karma for having lustful thoughts or for cursing someone or even committing a bodily offense. We have the results of those actions, and that might be a punishment of some sort. But it really, from the standpoint of what we do spiritually, it's just cause and effect. If I do a good thing, I'll get a good result. If I do a bad thing, I get a bad result. No one's up there counting points and deciding what the divine retribution is going to be or anything like that. Although there are some discourses in which that sort of thing is discussed, but those are spiritual stories really to help us get a handle on the fact that we need to be careful of what we do. So good actions, and when I say good, I mean actions that lead toward happiness and away from suffering for ourselves and others, have good results. And Buddhists often refer to this as merit. We do meritorious things, and as a result, we're growing seeds that will ripen into good results. Those good results are blessings. And so to a Buddhist, our blessings represent the ripening of seeds of good actions that we have planted at some point in the past. So I want to contrast the Buddhist view of karma with some other ideas about karma. During the Buddhist time, there were three common schools of thought that the Buddha felt were mistaken. And first, there were those that believed that whatever happened to you was due to some divine plan. You couldn't really affect how you ended up because your life was already predetermined. And someone asked me about the Buddhist view on destiny one time not too long ago. And there's really not one. The Buddhist view on destiny is that you're responsible for the results of your actions. You're responsible for what you do. And so if you've ended up in a bad place, it's not just some weird divine, the divine finger of fate points and there you are. It's the result somehow of action that has happened in the past. Might not have been your action. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the important thing is that we're responsible for the results of our actions. It's not predetermined for us. Second, there were those who believed that there was no cause and effect. When you die, that's it. It's nothing further. So you do what you want to do. The problem with this is that even if you're strictly humanistic, you'll see that your actions have results. And that's why atheists tend to be no less ethical and no less moral than theists who despite not worrying that they're going to go to hell when they die or whatever, humanists tend to be just about as good as not as deists. So the third, which was the prevailing view in India, was that what you experience in life, pleasant or unpleasant, is entirely the result of actions in previous lives. And that's the Brahmanistic understanding of karma that resulted in things like the caste system, where your past life determines your present life. But that's still predetermination. And the Buddha's view was that while actions from past lives determine some things, like where we're born and what we look like and so on, our current actions also have an effect on our present and on our future, both in this life and in lives to come. Sometimes when something bad happens, like if there's a catastrophe that affects a lot of people or something bad happens to someone seemingly innocent, somebody will ask me, does this mean that they had bad karma? Does that mean if there's an earthquake that kills a whole lot of people or a tidal wave washes away a whole city or something like that, does that mean that all those people had negative karma and it resulted from that? So the Buddha said fairly clearly that the law of karma was complicated and that sort of, if I do good, I get a good result, is not the only thing at work, and that other factors come into play. For example, there was a situation where he was asked, some contemplatives teach this doctrine. Whatever an individual experiences, pleasure or pain, is entirely caused by what was done in previous existence. What do you say to that? And the Buddha replied, there are cases where some feelings arise based on diseases of the gallbladder. The world agrees on how there are feelings that arise based on this. And so any contemplative who expounds the doctrine that whatever an individual feels is entirely caused by what was done before are ignoring what they themselves know. And therefore, I say this is wrong. And then he goes on to say that feelings arise based on various other internal physical factors, like from the weather, from attacks, from the result of present karma. So this idea that whatever you experience now is based solely on past actions is misguided, according to the Buddha. And I happen to agree. We could go into a lot more in that discussion someday. But there has been this idea that, even if you kill somebody, it's their negative karma that causes you to kill them. So you can't be responsible for that. Well, in that case, there would be no such thing as negative karma. What result would you experience if you were just helping someone, live out their own karma, right? So that argument unravels, I think, pretty quickly. And so I think that there are people who do bad things that affect good people. And those good people probably get reborn in a better place as a result of it, or something like that. So our past karma makes us human. It puts us in a particular place with certain capacities and things like that. But laws of physics, laws of nature, actions of other people, our own actions also contribute to the present. If you look at the verses on ownership of karma that are very, very, very traditional, go back to the Pali Canon, says, I'm the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related by my karma. In other words, related to the world I'm in and to others by my actions. So if I do something negative that affects you, that's my karma, that's not your karma. We also can't say for sure how a seed of karma will ripen or when. We can assume that ripening is inevitable and that it will bear good fruit or bad fruit based on the intentions behind the seed that we plant. So, for instance, we know that killing and stealing are negative karmas. The Buddha pointed out that if you kill or steal on behalf of your king, they're likely to garland you and parade you through town like a hero. But if you're caught killing or stealing as an enemy, you'd be beheaded, which that's what happened back in those days. So you don't necessarily experience the results here and now, but you will eventually experience the results of your negative action. I think it's better when it happens quickly. And I have a personal experience from that that it reminds me of this all the time. So when I was a little kid, I don't know how old I was, probably 4 years old. I was with my mom at the grocery store. She was doing her shopping. And there was always a section in the stores where there were toys. And so you had to walk past that. It's to get the kids' attention, and they'll ask for something and maybe mom will buy it. So there was a little ball. There was a little container of little rubber balls. And I saw one and I liked it. And so I picked it up and I put it in my pocket. And so we got in the car to go home. And I'm sitting in the front seat next to my mom. This was before child carriers and even seat belts were in most cars and that sort of thing. So I'm just sitting there and I take out the ball and I start playing with it. So I was a criminal, but I wasn't a very smart criminal. Right? Right. So my mom goes, "Where'd you get that?" "At the store." "Did you pay for it?" "Huh? You have to pay for things that you get at the store. Otherwise, that's stealing." And so she turned the car around. It took me back to the store. And I had to go inside, and she took me in, and we found whoever was the manager or the grocer or whatever. And I gave them the ball back, and I apologized for taking it. And he was very kind, and he accepted the ball back and thanked me for my honesty. So that was a negative result. I was embarrassed and ashamed and all of that, and it took extra time to get home because my mom had to turn the car around and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't punished, right? Because I didn't really know I'd done anything wrong. But in doing that, I found out that I had done something wrong, right? So the negative result that I got actually was over time a positive thing. So actions happen within the context of other actions. So the effects of negative karma that we've done can be diluted by meritorious actions. The analogy that the Buddha used was putting salt in water. And he said, suppose a man was to drop a salt crystal into a small amount of water in a cup. What would happen? And the monks he was talking to said the water in the cup would taste salty. And he said, well, suppose the man were to drop the same salt crystal into the river Ganges. What would happen? And would the water taste salty or unfit to drink? And the monk said, no, of course not. Although I've seen the Ganges. Don't drink that water. If you're, if you're a native Indian, you have the antibodies that can allow that. But if you're a Westerner, you don't. So don't take my advice on this one. Use a different river, right? Or swimming pool. So the idea being that if we put a little bit of negative karma in with a bunch of positive karma, it's not really going to have much of an effect. So if we have previous negative karma and we create a sea, a river of positive karma, we can still become enlightened. And so the Buddha says, in that case, in the same way, an evil deed done by one individual takes him to hell. And there is a case where the same sort of deed done by another individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part, barely appears for a moment. So, in other words, if you do something wrong, but you mostly do things right, then you're not going to suffer for it. You'll still suffer for it, but much less than if you're consistently evil, right? Or if you just don't do good stuff. So one of the other questions I got recently was, are there things that are such bad karma you can't get over them? You can't dilute their effects? I think somebody asked me this at White Sands a couple of weeks ago. So there's a good example of that. There was the earliest known serial killer, I think, was a fellow named Angulimala, which means necklace of fingers. Well, mala is a necklace. This is a mala. And the story with him was that he wanted to kill 1,000 people. He had started killing people he liked. It decided he'd do 1,000. So he was keeping track of how many people he killed by cutting off a finger as a souvenir, stringing it around his neck on a necklace. Well, long story short, the Buddha decided that he would save him. There was some previous positive karma from past lives there involved and so on. And so the Buddha went and rescued him basically from the effects of his negative karma by basically showing him the error of his ways in a really dramatic way. And he walked into the woods where Angulimala was hiding. And Angulimala saw this monk walking unprotected through the woods and decided he'd kill him and take whatever he had for himself. He wasn't just a murderer, he was a murderous bandit. So he killed and stole. And so he started following the Buddha. And the Buddha was just walking very peacefully at this kind of casual, slow pace. And Angulimala should have easily been able to catch up to him, but he couldn't. He's running as fast as he can run. He's not getting any closer to the Buddha because the Buddha's, supernatural powers at that point. And so Angulimala finally hollers at him, "Stop, monk." And the Buddha stops and turns around and goes, "I have stopped. Why don't you stop?" And there was something about that encounter that made Angulimala pause. And he said, what are you saying? And he said, the Buddha said, you need to stop this, the harm you're causing, or you're going to end up in a really bad place. And so Angulimala heard what he had to say and ended up throwing his weapons into a ravine and bowing down to him and ordaining. And he became an arhat. So there is there is redemption possible. He still had to experience some negative results. I can't remember who it was. Somebody came to arrest him and put him in jail, and the Buddha intervened for him and said, "Look, this guy's a devout monk now and an arahant." And so this equivalent of a sheriff back in those days was convinced and let him stay with the Buddha. But he would go into villages on an alms round, and somebody recognized him and they'd throw rocks at him and stuff like that. And on one of these occasions, he went back to the monastery, and he was all bruised and battered and bleeding. And the Buddha said, what was this? And he told him, and the Buddha said, well, you're going to experience these things, but it's a lot better than what you would have experienced, which would have been eon upon eon of suffering in hell realms. So another thing comes up: can you do something that negates the positive merit you've already done? So there is light karma with a light result, right? Good thing gives a good result. There's dark karma with a dark result. Do a bad thing, bad result. There's light and dark karma with a light and dark result. So sometimes you do something good that has a little bit of bad into it somehow, right? Things like, well, you can think about this and come up with some ideas yourself, but things like, if you were a police officer and you had to shoot somebody to keep them from shooting somebody else, it's a mixed thing. A lot of times the negative is really unintentional, but karma is complicated. Like I said, karma is complicated. But if you have accumulated enough positive karma, then spiritually, you're not going to go backwards. Spiritually, you're not going to go backwards. There's a discourse. It's there's a story. It's kind of the backstory of one of the verses in the Dhammapada, and I don't remember which one, but there was a monk who had become a stream enterer, or maybe even a once returner. I don't remember. Anyway, he had reached at least one of the stages on the path that says that enlightenment is inevitable. And then somehow or another, he had started drinking and ended up drunk. And the Buddha came to the monastery where he was staying, and he was staying there, and he mentioned something about this guy being a stream enterer. And the other monks were, "You're crazy. He's an alcoholic." And the Buddha explained, well, he's done this much. He's going to at least become enlightened, if not in this lifetime, some lifetime in the future. So stream entry is where you have created enough good results. You've done enough things that you've accumulated enough good results that your enlightenment is inevitable. Maybe not in this lifetime, maybe not in a couple or three lifetimes, but your awakening is inevitable. So that's kind of how this works. If you dilute the actions from previous if you dilute the results from previous negative actions enough, then it's kind of like washing the stains out of clothing with pure water, right? Eventually, it'll come clean, or at least be diminished to the point that, you can still wear it, right? So you don't have to be a Buddhist, by the way, to do meritorious things and even experience possible awakening. One of the most immediate examples of that I can think of is a friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, who was the chaplain at Stetson before I came along, Michael. And when he was terminally ill, he had asked me to come and meet with him, do some end-of-life conversations with him and things like that. And so the more I got to know this guy, the more I realized this was a very spiritually advanced human being. Wasn't a Buddhist. Well, he became a Buddhist, but he also retained the religion that he had grown up with. We think you can do that. You don't have to convert to Buddhism. You can just start the practice. And so he saw enough common ground and all of that. He practiced Buddhism and remained a Baptist. and would refer to himself as a Baptist Buddhist. It's okay with me. So I actually ended up, before he died, giving him dharma transmission because I felt that he was a master. He's the only person I've given dharma transmission to. He went for refuge with me, but he would say these things. It was so profound, and they would just come up in conversation. They weren't things he had rehearsed a lot or anything like that. But he would just say these very profound things that let me know that he really experienced the Dharma. He wouldn't have called it that before he met me, but he had. And I started thinking, why is this? And it's because, well, there's a couple of things. One is that he had spent a lot of time dealing with people's funerals and memorial services and stuff. And so he had seen the reality of coming and going. But the other is that he had just done a lot of good. He had lived a life of goodness. He really was the embodiment of goodwill and compassion. And so he had the wisdom and he had the compassion. And I felt that he had achieved mastery, even though he had only been a Buddhist very briefly. So anyway, I hope that this was useful to you. And by the way, he would talk to me about something sometimes where he would explain that when he gave Dharma talks or when he gave sermons at memorial services, he would talk about the importance of the sacred story. And he asked me once to tell him the story of my spiritual practice. How did I go from being born in a Baptist family in Texas in the 60s to being a Buddhist and teacher and so on. And so I told him this story and he thanked me and he goes, that's your scripture. That's your sacred story. And I just kind of looked at him and blinked. And he goes, I use this idea a lot in memorial services. He said, I tell people, go and share these stories about the person who has departed because that's what keeps them alive. That's what makes them, and it makes their story and your story the same thing. Your story is my story is your story. And that's how all of those sacred ideas live on, is through sharing our sacred stories. So anyway, I hope that this has been helpful to you. And I hope that you're able to put some of this into practice. And I will talk to you again Wednesday, and I'll see you Thursday. And I'll be back at White Sands next Sunday. I have a new camera on order that hopefully will not have the same problem as the last one, which made and we might have to experiment with it for a couple of sessions, but I think we'll have the sound back in place much better. I'm sorry about the last one. I know that was terrible, but anyway, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to. Yes. Well, yes. We all have the seed of Buddha nature within us. We have to, over time, do enough positive actions, enough good karmas to get us there. And so, yes, as we see it, our role is to help all beings become liberated. And so our role, our ultimate goal spiritually is that all beings will eventually be liberated. And so everyone you look at, even the roaches, even the hungry ghosts, they're all destined for enlightenment eventually. So Dharma transmission is when one master recognizes mastery in another one. So there's this idea, and this is a Zen thing. The story, which is probably apocryphal, but it's a good story anyway, is that the Buddha assembled all of his likeliest successors together, and he held up a flower. Instead of talking, he just held up a flower. And so one of them saw this and smiled. I'll talk about this in more detail one of these days. And so the Buddha said, all right, he gets it. And so he became his successor on the sort of the Zen side of things, the meditative side, the side of direct understanding. And so the idea is that there's wordless transmission from one master to another. Because the Buddha didn't say anything, just held up a flower. And the other became his successor in that. So when Venerable Kai Tien recognized some degree of realization in me, or thought he did anyway, said he did, he offered me Dharma transmission and I accepted it. So that basically makes me one of his successors. So does that answer your question? And there actually are some words. There's a ritual. There's some saying things. But in Soto Zen, Kai Tien didn't do this with me, but in Soto Zen, and perhaps others too, I don't know, the moment of transmission is recognized by touching forehead to forehead. It's as if it's going from my head to your head. Although it would probably be more accurate to go heart to heart, but that would be like a chest bump, and that would be weird. All right. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Sabe sata sadahantu avera sukha jivino katang punya phalang mahang sabe bhagi bhavantu te. May all beings always live happily, free from animosity. May all share in the blessings that spring from the good we have done. See you next week.